What's up everyone, Professor Leis here. In this video I'm going to read through and explain the prompt for the Annotated Bibliography, which is a component of Major Essay Project number 3. It just has its own separate prompt just for the sake of convenience. Before we jump into the prompt itself, I want to talk about what an annotated bibliography is. So to do that, let's parse the phrase into two. So annotated, to annotate, as we know, means to take notes on. An annotation is a note. So if something is annotated, it means it has notes on it. Now, a bibliography, if we break the word into two, we have the base word biblio, and then we have the suffix graphy. Now, those of you who speak Spanish might recognize biblio as book, right? That's where the Spanish word biblioteca, meaning library, where that comes from, right? It also means Bible in some instances, which is book, right? And then the suffix graphy, it has a few different connotations, but essentially in this case it means like a written record of something. So when we combine it all together, a bibliography is a written record of books or sources that you may have used in an essay. And if it's annotated, it means that record has notes taken on it. Okay, so what the heck does that actually mean in practice? Let's read the prompt here. An important component of a research project is the annotated bibliography. Annotated bibliographies challenge us to read and assess our sources critically, evaluating both their content and merit. Additionally, because the research process takes considerable time and effort, annotated bibliographies can help keep us on track with our research timeline. Because this project is designed to help us gather sources for Major Essay Project number 3, the sources you include in your annotated bibliography should all center on a single topic or issue. So again, the annotated bibliography is a component of Major Essay Project 3. And it's meant to help us gather our sources, or to at least immerse ourselves in that research to help us with the composition of Major Essay Project 3, and also to keep us on track with that research process. So that's why it's important that the sources that you annotate and include in your annotated bibliography all focus on the topic that you're researching for Major Essay Project 3. Okay, so that's really important. So let's get a little bit more specific here. For our purposes, there are 4 components for each annotated bibliography entry. So each entry has 4 components, which we're going to look at right now. So the first component is the correct and complete bibliographic information for your source, formatted according to MLA guidelines, just as it would look on a regular works cited page. So depending on the type of source you use, you'll format the publication information according to those guidelines. And I'll show you how to do that in a different video where I talk about the databases and such. But that's the first component. So it'd be the citation, just as it would appear in a regular works cited page. The second component is where, the other 3 components, that's where the annotation comes into play. So the second component is a brief summary of the source. So at least 5 to 7 sentences wherein the writer details what the source contains, explains what its argument and supporting points are, or offers a description of the source if it does not have an explicit argument. For example, if it's a research report or piece of research data, it may not have an explicit argument in it. So in that case, you would just provide a description of what that source is. But in most cases, the sources that you do find will have some kind of argument, some sort of position, some sort of opinion that the writer or writers are trying to get across. So you would want to provide a brief but detailed summary of that source. So what's the main argument? How does the author support that argument? What sort of examples and kind of supporting points do they include? The third element or component of the annotated bibliography entry is an assessment or evaluation of the source's quality, at least 3 to 5 sentences. How valuable is the source? Explain. Does the source have any limitations, perhaps? So this is where you would offer some sort of assessment or analysis of the source. What does the source contain that is especially effective? What are some of the points that the writer might have that you think are particularly strong? And then you also might include, if you're noticing that maybe the source has some good components, but maybe some of the other points in the source are not as good, you might point that out a little bit. You know, the author does this well, however, they fail to acknowledge X, Y, or Z, blah, blah, blah. But you don't need to. In most cases, you probably won't, but you could also offer some sort of negative assessment if that's the case. But chances are you won't, because you're probably going to have sources that you think are good, right? So, and then the final component is a brief but detailed explanation of how the source will fit into your research project. And so that'll be at least 2 to 3 sentences. How will it relate to your other sources? How do you plan to use it in your project? Or what might it add to your exploration? So this is where you're going to think a little bit about how you plan to use the source in your essay. How does it connect to some of the other sources that you've found? Is there a particular point in there that you think connects really well to a point in another source that you found? You know, so whatever the case is, you're going to offer some kind of indication of how you plan to use the source or how it fits in with all the other sources you've found so far. Okay. Now this will be especially useful when it comes to time for you to sit down to write your draft, your first draft, because you just go back to your annotated bibliography and look and say, oh, this is how I plan to use this source, so I got to make sure I incorporate this source in this way to benefit my essay project. So another use of the annotated bibliography is that, to kind of give you some pre-writing ideas. Okay, so in total, you're going to provide annotations for 4 sources, 2 of which must be from the library databases. Each annotation, or entry as it's also referred as, should be at least 250 words in length. MLA guidelines apply, however, you do not need to double space your annotated bibliography, and that's really just for the sake of aesthetics. When we double space them, it just looks a little weird to me. So, and also save you some space there on your page. So you don't need to double space the annotated bibliography, but all the other MLA guidelines apply. Now, it's not listed here because this video I'm creating for a couple different classes, and there are different due dates for those classes. But the annotated bibliography is split into 2 parts, just to kind of spread the work out a little bit. So part 1, you're going to have 2 entries, and part 2, which is due a week after part 1, you're going to have your other 2 entries. So when you put it all together, you'll have those 4 sources, or the 4 entries. But we're breaking it into 2 just to spread the work out a little bit. So refer to your specific prompt to see how the due dates for those 2 parts for that are. Now I want to show you an example entry that I created. So let's go ahead and click on this, and we shall see this entry. So this is an example entry that I created using a text or an essay from Habits of the Creative Mind called On Learning from Failure. So if you'll recall, we took a look at this at the start of the semester, so we should all be familiar with this source. So I have my regular MLA heading, right? So I have my name, I have the professor's name, English, and then you would just put in your corresponding English 100, English 1, English 5, English whatever. And then the date written in the international format, so you're going to put the number. So if it's 3, you would put 3, and then November, and then 2020. No commas or anything in between, you'll notice. And then I just skip down to a new line, directly new line. I have a title for my entire document. It's not for each entry, it's just for my entire document, but this one I only have one entry, so just keep that in mind. You only need one title for the entire document. You're not going to title each entry. So in this case I called it failing forward, which is a phrase that appears in another kind of imagined source, so I'll get to that in a second, where, well, you'll see, I'll get to that in a second, colon annotated bibliography, just so I know what it is, right? Now here I have the first component of the entry, which is the publication information formatted according to MLA guidelines, right? So just as it would appear on a works cited page. So here I have the authors, Miller, comma, Richard E., comma, and Ann Jurecic, so Richard E. Miller and Ann Jurecic. The title of the essay that I am annotating, On Learning from Failure, comes from the book Habits of the Creative Mind. Bedford St. Martin's, 2016, pages 220 through 224. So here I have my second component, which is the brief but detailed summary of the entire source. So let me go ahead and I'll just read this real briefly. In this essay, Miller and Jurecic focus on the importance that a student's mindset plays in dealing with failure. They begin their essay with an extended example of children building a sandcastle to demonstrate the way children learn from mistakes and setbacks. Miller and Jurecic point out that successful college students tend to view mistakes and setbacks as opportunities for growth and learning. They call these students the learners. Students who are not as successful, on the other hand, view mistakes and setbacks negatively and are often discouraged by them. They call this group of students the knowers. Ultimately, Miller and Jurecic make the case that to learn to write in the way they encourage us to, in Habits of the Creative Mind, we must be willing to take risks and to learn from our mistakes. Okay, so that's just a brief but detailed summary of that source. And then the next component is my assessment of that source. Miller and Jurecic don't make an explicit connection to Carol Dweck's concepts of fixed and growth mindsets when they discuss the learners and the knowers. It's unlikely that the authors are unaware of Dweck's work, so not making this connection seems like a missed opportunity. Despite this, their argument is well constructed and the examples they use are insightful, especially the sandcastle example and the connection they make to Ken Bain's thesis in his book, What the Best College Students Do. So here I'm pointing out an area, something that I think is a limitation. I'm pointing out I thought they probably could have enhanced their point if they were to have drawn that connection. But I'd also point out what I think is particularly useful in this source. And then I have, as my final component of the entry, the brief indication of how I plan to use this source or how it fits in with the other sources I've gathered. So in this case, this essay connects very well with Kevin Kelly's short essay, The Virtues of Negative Results. And I plan to tie Miller and Jurecic's ideas to Kelly's point about failing forward. Since Miller and Jurecic did not draw the parallel to Dweck's work, I will also make that connection clear. So earlier when I was talking about the title, Failing Forward, that's a quotation that I am quoting from this particular source, which we didn't take a look at. But I'm pointing out for the sake of example that On Learning from Failure, this essay connects really well to The Virtues of Negative Results, which is a different essay. So I'm just pointing that out. So now when it comes time for me to sit down and work on my draft of Major Essay Project 3, I can say, oh yeah, I pointed out that those two sources connect in this way, so let me try to explain that for my readers in my essay. So to clarify, all of this is only one entry. Okay, so recall we need to have for each part of the annotated bibliography, we need to have 2 entries for a total of 4 altogether. Now, each entry should be a minimum of 250 words in length. So all of this right here, a minimum of 250 words for that one source. Okay, so when you do the math, 4 sources, 250 words each is approximately 1,000 words in total. Okay, split between all the sources. So just keep that in mind. This is an example of one entry. Each part of your AnBib will have 2 sources, so you have an additional one. You'll just skip a line and start your next one. So, all right, everyone, if you have questions, please, please, please let me know. I'm happy to discuss this with you. I want to make sure that we're all aware of the challenges laid out in this particular aspect of Major Essay Project number 3. All right, y'all, happy researching.